The William Stafford quote. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. Downstairs in my counseling office, there are 3 pieces of art. A plaque with these words from Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung: "Bidden or not bidden, God is present." A wall decal that announces, "To heal is to restore the memory of wholeness." And a framed gift card that says simply, "Breathe." I love each of these messages. They help create the sacred space and safe holding environment I desire to anyone who comes into that room. Each image provides a touchstone of hope when darkness overwhelms. People come to counseling with practical problems, emotional pain, and spiritual hungers. A crumbling relationship, a mood or anxiety disorder, a sense of dissatisfaction with life in general. As we talk about their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, we often discuss practical steps, strategies for improved communication and conflict resolution, exercise and possible medication for mood disorders, assertiveness training for greater self-actualization, and journaling to tap into the sometimes quiet and other times very loud tapes that play in our heads. We spend a lot of time in the presence of intense emotion. While exploring their concerns and working with therapeutic interventions, a deeper longing sometimes arises. They may not express it just this way, and they may or may not use religious words fundamental to the person of faith. Nevertheless, the questions remind me of Job's wrestling. St. Francis frames the questions this way: who are you, God, and who am I? They're at the very foundation of Job's encounter with God. His questions arise from confusion over the nature of God and what it means for Job to be in relationship with the transcendent. Who is this God? How does God act in the world and in our individual lives? How does God relate to God's creation? Job's well-meaning but misguided friends present a God of judgment who imposes penalties for sinful behavior. His friends' arguments create a tension within Job. He knows he has done nothing to offend God. He wants to understand why these tragedies have come upon him. In times of suffering, do you find yourself asking why questions of God? Or perhaps standing in God's stead, telling God what you think needs to be done? Have you walked away from God in protest over unfulfilled expectations? I have a confession to make, and it's kind of embarrassing. I recall a time when I was much younger, and in the midst of deep personal suffering, I railed at God, proclaiming, "I can do a better job of running this world than you can." Phew, talk about egocentricity and hubris. God didn't strike me down. God didn't abandon me. God waited patiently for my return. And it wasn't necessary to come back in dustcloth and ashes, only with the humility that opened me to receive God's grace. Today I'd like to share a small part from 3 different journeys of existential suffering. Each story illustrates a little bit of the amazing and complex lives we're talking about. While I've altered details to protect anonymity, the circumstances of spiritual renewal remain true to their experience. One person with whom I worked shared an event that reminds me of Job and the questions we're considering today. Who are you, God? And who am I? Deeply wounded by family abuse as well as cultural threat and exclusion, in a moment of intense suffering, they confessed, when I was at my lowest, most desperate place, when I could take no action on my own behalf, God clung to me. God embraced this person in the center of physical, emotional, and spiritual storm. And that embrace gave them enough strength to endure pain and begin moving forward toward life. In this moment of transformation, that individual awakened to the God of love. God who was present with us in our brokenness. God didn't condemn them. God didn't change cultural circumstances to make life more comfortable. God clung to them and continues clinging and loving them into healing and wholeness, whatever the external circumstances. The relational exchange between a broken human being and the always present divine shined a sliver of light into the darkness. It opened space for the healing to begin. Some words from the song Kathy has been playing called Come Healing by Leonard Cohen. Behold the gates of mercy in arbitrary space, and none of us deserving the cruelty or the grace. Oh, see the darkness yielding that tore the light apart. Come healing of the reason, come healing of the heart. Oh, troubledness concealing an undivided love, the heart beneath is teaching, the broken heart above. A second person wrestling with the existential suffering we're focusing on today is a counselor in a treatment facility for young girls coming out of human trafficking. She's not much older than the girls she serves. The daily stories of human degradation and physical and sexual abuse torment her sense of righteousness and of personal security. Like some of us, she wrestles with a cultural system that puts greater emphasis on power, prestige, and wealth than on the plight of human suffering. While a person of faith, she doesn't talk a lot about God, but in her times of despair, when her suffering is greatest, she picks up a pen and writes poetry. Her words remind me of the Psalms, often filled with confusion and righteous anger. Frequently, through the expression of her feelings, her questions, and her doubts, a glimmer of light breaks in, and the darkness begins to fade. Hope is born, and she recognizes the deep meaning of her work while also learning to care for her own emotional and spiritual well-being. Again, from Come Healing. And let the heavens falter, let the ear proclaim, come healing of the altar, come healing of the name. O longing of the branches to life the little bud, O longing of the arteries to purify the blood. And let the heavens hear it, the penitential hymn. Come healing of the spirit, come healing of the limb. I journeyed with another person through clinical depression. They used a metaphor to describe their despair. It's like walking around with a dark cloud hanging over my head, and I have little hope of seeing the light again. Slowly, we stripped away layer upon layer of covering. Eventually, we came to recognize grief over the tragic death of a 3-year-old sibling. Where was God when my brother died? Why did God allow this tragedy to happen? Inquiries that came from the long repressed inner pain of a 5-year-old child. Grieving was complicated by well-intentioned family members who, from the storm of their own inner torment, told the child, God wanted your brother and took him to heaven, and he's in a better place. Unfortunately, that created more worries for the little girl. If God took my brother, when will he take me? Week after week, we wrestled with questions surrounding life's impermanence. Week after week of tears and periods of feeling God's absence. Eventually, the question subsided, and the person felt into her deep sadness. She journaled, drew pictures, followed her dreams, and did active imagination. She talked about her loss with a few trusted friends, and she continued praying. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Again and again, progress was slow. But over time, the darkness began to lift. The sight of a tiny green plant growing out of a crack in the sidewalk cement. Seasons of the year replicating the cycle of life and death. A mental image of her brother being birthed into the welcoming arms of God. All experiences that she described as spiritual awakenings. All occurrences that enabled the light to begin shining in her life once more. These are not tales where the fairy godmother waves her magic wand and life's challenges suddenly change or disappear. These are stories, by God's grace, of lives given strength, courage, and hope to live again. Oh, and that person whose brother died, that was me. My healing journey was blessed by a skilled pastoral therapist who walked with me through the pain of grief. And the slow work of God, the transformative healing that came and continues unfolding, that awakened in me the call to become a pastoral counselor and spiritual director. I'd like to close with a poem that Reverend Sarah read at the beginning of our service. Everything falls away. Sooner or later, everything falls away. You, the work you've done, your successes, large and small, your failures too. Those moments when you were light alongside the times you became one with the night. The friends, the people you loved who loved you, those who might have wished you ill. None of this is forever. All of it is soon to go, or going, or gone. Everything falls away except the thread you've followed, unknowing all along. The thread that strings together all you've been and done, the thread you didn't know you were tracking until, toward the end, you see that the thread is what stays as everything else falls away. Follow that thread as far as you can, and you'll find that it does not end, but weaves into the unimaginable vastness of life. Your life was never the solo turn it seemed to be. It was always part of the great weave of nature and humanity. An immensity we come to know only as we follow our own small threads to the place where they merge with the boundless whole. Each of our threads runs its course, then joins in life together. The magnificent tapestry, this masterpiece in which we live forever. Amen.